For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited training.
Hello and welcome to the Snowbrains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge on to you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a professional mountain guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, as well as a founder and CEO of Snowbrains. The Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Alta Ski Area, an independent mountain with a laid-back vibe that averages 547 inches of deepness every winter. Today, my guest is the director of the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, Dr. Ethan Greene. Dr. Greene has an undergraduate degree in meteorology, a master's in atmospheric science, a PhD in geoscience. He's written 2 books on snow science and avalanches. He has over 45 publications in the snow science world, and he is obviously an avid backcountry skier. All right, Ethan, welcome to the Snowbrains podcast. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Miles. I'm doing great, and I really appreciate the invitation to be on the first podcast with you.
I'm going to jump straight into some Colorado avalanche numbers. Colorado unfortunately sees the lion's share of avalanche fatalities in the USA. According to the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, since 1950, 287 people have died in avalanches in Colorado. The next highest total is Alaska with 158. My opening question is, why do more people die in avalanches in Colorado than in any other state?
Well, there's sort of 2 time frames to look at, I guess. There's historically, and part of that is because, recreation in Colorado has been a really big part of the culture for, since the 1950s, when ski areas started opening up and climbing and ski touring really became popular in the state. And then sort of looking at what's happening now is that recreation is still a big part of the culture here. And the way that that feeds into the number of people that get involved in avalanches in Colorado is that you have a lot of people walking around the Colorado mountains in the wintertime. There's a lot of settlements in the mountains. There's a lot of roads that run through the mountains. There's a lot of access into the mountains. And so there's some other aspects, but a really big part of it is just that there's a lot of people in this state that are traveling in avalanche terrain, pursuing some type of recreation. Well, the other part is the snow climate. Like, we're in a continental snow climate, which means we have a relatively thin snowpack. We have really cold temperatures. We have a lot of wind. And what that does is it tends to produce avalanche cycles that are based on some sort of structural weakness in the snowpack. So in contrast to, say, the Sierra or the Cascades, where not all, but certainly a lot of the avalanche cycles are driven by really large storms, big precip events that put down a huge amount of precipitation in, maybe a couple of days. And so you have these huge spikes in avalanche danger, and then they subside pretty quickly. In Colorado, we build these structural weaknesses early in the season. They get buried, and we tend to see avalanches on them, and then we see avalanches on those layers really throughout the whole year. So we tend to kind of build up to a moderate avalanche danger. We'll see some spikes at considerable and high, but we don't really drop down below moderate too much. We sort of hover in that considerable and moderate avalanche danger for a really long period of time. And what that means is that there's a lot of days in Colorado where you can go out and it is a bluebird day. There's not that much wind. It's really nice. And you can ski a bunch of slopes. But there's also a bunch of slopes where you can trigger a deadly avalanche.
Great. Yeah, I think that's all critical information. And one of the things, or 2 of the things that seem to really stick out in my mind when I'm skiing in Colorado is what you touched on there: thin snowpack and cold temperatures. Do you think those are 2 of the biggest?
Yeah, I mean, those are big impacts on the snow metamorphism that we see in the mountains, and that's what causes those persistent weak layers to form. And of course, the key factor in persistent weak layers is that they're persistent. They last for a long time. And so we tend to watch what's happening really right about now in Colorado and over the next, 6 weeks or so. And a lot of what sort of avalanche conditions we're going to see in February and March rely on what's happening right now.
Well, that's perfect segue to my next question. How does early season snow cause dangerous weak layers in the snowpack that can last all season?
Well, really, if we have early season snow, that's not a good thing.
Right.
In order to have a less active avalanche year in Colorado, typically what we want is for a dry fall where we don't see a lot of snow. And then usually if we make it to, say, mid-November or after Thanksgiving without too much snow on the ground, and then it starts to snow and we bury it, we get consistent snowfall after that. The times that we get really bad depth hoar layers and bad persistent avalanche cycles is when we have some sort of snowpack early in the season. We had this huge avalanche cycle in March of 2019, and that was a lot of that, at least the weak layer, was formed in early October, where we had pretty consistent snow cover from tree line up on every aspect in Colorado. And that thin snowpack sat around for about 6 weeks and turned into a really bad depth hoar layer. And then when we started getting snow on it, we started seeing avalanches in December and into January. And then eventually they sort of got covered up and we weren't seeing a lot of avalanches on that layer until we got a really big set of storms in early March and produced catastrophic avalanches, 50 to maybe 300-year size avalanches in different parts of the state.
Wow. Yeah, it's terrifying, right? And so another quick question on that subject of early season snow is we got some snow in Colorado early already this year. People were skiing in September. So it was a significant amount of snow. Is that snow that happened this year, is that going to cause trouble? Is that going to be problematic, or has that already melted off? What have you seen out there?
It's mostly melted off. It's still lingering in a few places, up high, north faces. And there's certain parts of the state where it's a little worse than others. I'm hoping we get another, couple of weeks of dry weather, maybe another warm snap, and it'll melt that all away. Most of the places that I've seen, it's not a large enough area spatially. It's not covering enough space that it's really going to be a huge problem. But it is something that, we're looking at, and we still kind of have our fingers crossed that it's all going to melt and go away. Let's fit into the, the skier ethos that you want consistent snowfall, right? Like you want it to snow every day. So, because Colorado, we don't get those huge snowfalls like you would, closer into the coastal range. When the skiing is really good here is when it's, snowing 6 inches a night and just keeps coming. And that's what we want. We want that to happen. And typically if it starts sort of, around Thanksgiving, that's when we have a chance for it to get the snowpack to get deep enough that we just don't have those really bad basal weak layers.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed for that. When is the most dangerous time to backcountry ski and snowboard in Colorado?
Well, statistically, I think the most deaths happen kind of January and February. But, we can have a lot of bad avalanche involvements that don't actually lead to people getting killed, but injuries and other bad outcomes. We tend to see a lot of avalanche activity, human triggered avalanche activity, in kind of the second half of December and into January. So that can be a pretty dangerous time.
Holidays.
The holidays, yeah. And that's really when, if we have one of those bad basal weak layers, when the snowpack is still pretty shallow, that weak layer is a problem, but it's really not that dangerous because you just don't have the big slab sitting on top of it. And then as it keeps snowing, you start to get kind of that thicker and thicker slab, and you start moving from, maybe a snowpack that doesn't even really hold you up too much to snowpack that's deep enough and thick enough that you're on top of it and you've got that weak snowpack underneath it, weak layers underneath it. So that time can be fairly dangerous, but the times that people get into trouble that lead to death are more common in January and February.
Not knowing Colorado that well, I'm wondering, in general, does a big snowpack in Colorado mean it's a bit safer?
Yes, it depends on how it comes in. So again, if it's being built kind of consistently, then we tend to do better. There's also times, they're pretty unusual years, but occasionally we have a year where we just have a really thin and weak snowpack and we never really build enough of a slab or enough of a slab in enough places to be that dangerous. So those are times when we might have fewer avalanche involvements, but it's also where the riding is maybe not as good as it would have been other years.
Makes sense. But a thinner snowpack probably in general is more dangerous in Colorado.
Yeah, it's sort of that medium place, where, and again, it really depends on how the snowpack evolves. It's not really like one event that causes problems for us. It's a series of events that lead to these problems. So When we have those weak basal layers and then we get enough of a snowpack on top of it to hold you up to propagate that fracture so that you can produce a bigger and wider avalanche, that's really when we get into those dangerous times.
Scary stuff. When might be the safest time to backcountry ski and snowboard in Colorado?
Well, traditionally it's spring skiing. So, once we get through the year, we start to get some warmer temperatures in the springtime. The snowpack starts to consolidate. Sometimes we actually get a fair amount of snow during that time frame. And if it comes on top of a consolidated, base, you can have really good, nice soft snow skiing. But other times you get nice spring skiing. It's not exactly the corn that you would get in the Sierra.
Why is that? We have pondered on that. And this is putting you in a corner, man, because I know you got the degrees. You should have this answer, but I don't know if anybody does.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. There's certainly some things we could speculate on in terms of the elevation and the way the snow forms in the springtime when you're moving into that kind of wet snow regime. A lot of it in Colorado, I think, is maybe not having that coastal snowpack, that really deep, strong layer where
high moisture content.
Well, a lot of it too is just like you end up with, you want that really large, thick layer that you can just get the top of it to turn into that wet snow. I mean, really the beautiful corn skiing is where you have that really large grained ice and just a little bit of water.
Which people might not know that's where the term corn comes from, right? Is it the big piece of snow, basically, a big snow round?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that actually, but you could sell me on it for sure.
I'll sell you on it. Continue, sorry.
But, when you start to get that liquid water in the snowpack, you have a really different metamorphic regime. And so like the way that grains grow and the distribution of sizes really changes. In Colorado, we get that sometimes, but it really only happens over a small part of the snowpack. Whereas in the Sierra, you could end up getting this larger, much more consolidated upper part of the snowpack. It evolves further. And so I think you end up with that much kind of larger grain snow at the top that you can just get that thin film of water in and makes that kind of perfect corn snow.
So you want the bigger grains, you want the bigger pieces of corn, if you will, to get that good corn skiing, those bigger grains. And it does seem to happen more in the maritime climate.
Yeah, and I'm definitely speaking off the cuff at this point, so
we won't hold you to it.
We'll comment on and correct me, but I think that is more common to happen in a maritime, that coastal snowpack.
Well, then I'll jump right into how many backcountry skiers and riders do you think Colorado typically sees each winter? And if you do have an idea of that number, has that been going up or down?
Well, we have no idea what that number is. Although if you ask anybody who has been doing winter sports in Colorado for 5 or 10 or 20 years, they're all going to say that the use is going up. And we have lots of good anecdotal evidence that the use is going up. So the answer to your question is we have no idea how many people are out there, but we do know that it's increasing.
According to the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, for the past decade, the amount of avalanche deaths per year in the USA has been trending down significantly, with its peak being in around 2011 at around 31 deaths per year, and last season dropping down to around 21 deaths per year. What do you think is responsible for that downward trend in avalanche fatalities, and what could we do to keep that going?
Really good questions. The number of deaths in the United States fluctuates pretty dramatically by a third or so from year to year. So you can definitely say last year we had more, this year we had less. And so that's a downward trend. Because the numbers are not that big, I mean, we're really talking about between 15 and 35 or something like that. So from a data perspective, not large numbers. So when you look at that trend over, 10 or 15 years, it still is going down, but it's not going down sharply. It's just sort of this really kind of subtle downward trend. I think the reason for that is a few different things. Maybe I can sum it up into kind of 3 different factors. One is the avalanche centers. You've got these groups all across the country that are putting out forecasts for people every day. And I think that's had a really big impact on the number of deaths. The second is the avalanche training that's happening. You have the American Avalanche Association, you have ARI, they're putting out curriculum for all of these different course providers. You have providers all throughout the West that are teaching people about how to apply the forecasts, how to do backcountry rescue, how to move through avalanche terrain. And I think that's had a really big impact on this as well. And then lastly is the community. I think the community of backcountry recreationalists have really adopted avalanche safety as a core belief, as something that you need to know just as much as, how to ride your sled or how to move your split board between modes, or what kind of tech bindings you're going to ski on, what kind of beacon you're going to use, and that everybody in your group really needs to carry a beacon probe and a shovel and know how to use it. That sort of community pressure and support and change in behavior by peer pressure, I guess, I think is also
whatever works.
Yeah, exactly. It's had a huge impact on this. And so, together, and it's one of the things I love about, winter recreation is that community. So there's that public sector piece, the avalanche centers, there's the private sector piece of training, and then there's just all the people that are involved in it that are you're really doing their part to keep themselves and everybody else safe. And I think altogether that's kept the avalanche deaths flat or decreasing slightly, even though we all know that, or all feel that the use has gone up dramatically during that time.
I was just going to get to that as my next question. I think that is pivotal. Again, it might be anecdotal because we don't know the exact numbers, but it does seem clear. Backcountry use has gone up considerably, may potentially exponentially, and yet we're staying flat and or appears that we're going down with our avalanche deaths. So to me, that is a fantastic trend. And I do applaud you and your guys' team and all the avalanche centers in the US for that trend. I'm really impressed because I really think it's those 3 points you brought up all kind of come down to information, right? We're getting the proper information to the right people, and that's making a huge difference.
And people are using it. I mean, I think, we really want to pat on the back. I appreciate that, but it's all of us together, right? Like, the fact that there's this good training and good information out there really wouldn't mean anything if people weren't using it. And, you read the different websites, banter on social media. There's a lot of people that are encouraging each other to take avalanche safety seriously. I think that's extremely important. I mean, avalanches kill more people in Colorado than any other natural hazard. And so it really is an important issue. And the fact that people are taking it seriously, I think, has allowed it to stay at the level that it is. And, I certainly hope the number of deaths goes to zero. Just the fact that we're keeping it where it is, I think is a victory in itself.
Wow, I agree. That and that's a great segue again here is why is it important to report avalanche accidents and observations to your local avalanche center as soon as you can?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. For observations, the more information that we get, the better those forecasts are going to be. So we're sending people out in the field every day. We're talking to
how many might you send out there each day?
It depends a little bit, but we're probably in the 10 to 16 on a particular day.
Fantastic.
But we're covering, about 30,000 square miles of terrain. So
unbelievable. Wow.
When you look at the number of people and the terrain that's out there, we're very systematic about what we do. It's a big nut to crack, so to speak. So the other thing that we're doing is we're talking to all the ski areas. We're talking to guiding services. We're talking to, people that are plowing the snow, whether it's, our colleagues in CDOT or county road and bridge folks, really anybody we can talk to. And so all that information goes into our forecasts. The other piece that's really critical to that is the information that we get from the public. So anytime somebody writes us and tells us, hey, there was 6 inches of snow in this area, or, I got a woomph, in this area, I saw shooting crack, there's cornices building over here, or the most important thing, I saw an avalanche. This is where it was. These are the characteristics. All of that information is extremely important to us because what we're doing is we're putting it all into a central repository where we can sort it and filter it and look for patterns and figure out what's the most important issues that we can tell people about. So the more information we get, the better the forecasts are going to be. As far as avalanche accidents, that gives us 2 really important pieces of information. One is we know that you saw an avalanche or triggered an avalanche, and understanding how that was triggered and where it was are extremely important for us. The other piece is that we look at trends and how people get involved in accidents. That may be, the number of people that get involved in a soft slab, or the number of people that are triggering avalanches on skis, or the number of people that are triggering avalanches in this particular region. There's a lot of different stuff that we can sift out of that information. But knowing that those events happen is extremely important to us so that we can educate people about the dangers of avalanches. And of course, being a public servant, we have to justify our existence in the government. being able to relay to people, my superiors and the legislators in Colorado, that this is a problem, and whether the problem is getting better or worse, giving people some idea of the magnitude of it in Colorado is really important as well.
Why do people avoid reporting their avalanche accidents?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons that people might do it. There's still a little bit of a culture in our society that triggering an avalanche is a bad thing. And so people wonder whether they're going to face some sort of consequences, or whether they've done something wrong, or that they may be embarrassed about it, because, typically that involves some sort of mistake that we made, unless you were planning to trigger an avalanche. When you do trigger an avalanche, it's typically a mistake. So people have different reactions to that. And I think for the most part, I hope that we are also building the culture where people are tolerant and supportive of people that come forward with their story and help the avalanche forecast get better with that information. Also, other people can learn from your experience, whether it's not doing what you did very next day, or understanding that story, what led you to that scenario, and maybe avoiding something similar, whether it's months or years down the road.
You and I talked about this before the podcast, that, I was involved in my first avalanche accident this year. I triggered an avalanche and took a ride. And my gut reaction was, let's hide all this. And then when I, got home and let it sink in, I realized, no, this is really important for information. This could help somebody. This could save a life. This could save an accident. And so I did move forward with reporting that, and that felt better. And so I think for me too, you feel shame. And what does our community need to do to encourage the reporting of avalanche accidents, to encourage the people that get involved and might feel shame, but let's get them, how do we encourage them to put it out there?
Well, I think some of it is, just how the avalanche centers deal with people that are involved in avalanche accidents. And I hope for the most part, everyone's doing that with some respect and some understanding, helping people put their experience into context. A lot of times when we talk to folks, just like you described, it's the first time that they're involved in an avalanche, and they don't really know how to feel about it. How dangerous
Definitely.
was it? How close of a call was it? What should they do with that information? So I think the avalanche centers, do a really good job of being avalanche counselors at times, helping people sort of understand their experience and put it into context. I think as a society as well, social media can be a little bit of a brutal place sometimes. And
I was just going to mention that.
Hopefully people are, understanding where the person who's reporting their story is coming from. And I think if they are putting their story out, especially in a timely manner, they should really be commended, because that information will help all of us. Again, typically it happens around somebody making some sort of mistake, whether it's large or small. And so trying to put yourself in that position and, be empathetic of what their experience has been, and supportive that they're coming forward and telling that story. And of course, if you talk to somebody who triggered an avalanche and hasn't done that, again, being understanding that there's a lot of emotions that are tied up in that, but also trying to encourage them to at least send that information to the Avalanche Center if they don't feel like they can, share it with their friends group or the broader community. I think there's a lot of ways that you can share that information. The Avalanche Center, I think, is the most important one, because the Avalanche Center doesn't talk about that event specifically. If they just know the aspect and elevation and maybe a little bit about the size of the avalanche, they can put that information out, and it will help a lot of people. So there's sort of reporting large and small. I mean, you can go onto social media and bare your soul if that feels right to you. And I think that can be really helpful sometimes. But even just sending an observation with some very basic information to the Avalanche Center will help a lot of people, both the next day and in the days to come.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd like to make the point too, that you can submit all this stuff anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. So if you do want to avoid that situation of people knowing who it was, that's not a problem. The Avalanche Center is still very happy to get that information. And what percentage of avalanche deaths in the USA do you think are avoidable?
They're all avoidable. You can group them in sort of different ways. And I haven't looked at these statistics in a little bit. So I'll just use these numbers pretty roughly, but we used to talk about 90% of the avalanche deaths, at least, were the person who was killed or somebody in their party triggered that avalanche. And that's primarily because dry avalanches are what people get killed in.
What's a dry avalanche?
So an avalanche that's involving dry snow, so not liquid water in the snowpack. When you start to go to wet avalanches, and again, these numbers are off the top of my head and not current, but probably indicative of what's in the data. There's a much larger component of natural avalanches. So somebody's out skiing or snowshoeing, snowmobiling, and a wet avalanche releases naturally above them and comes down and kills them. So when you start
wrong place, wrong time.
Wrong place, wrong time. So are those two scenarios avoidable? Well, for the 90% where, I'm triggering it or you triggering it and I'm getting into trouble, yeah, like we have control over where we're going and when we're going, and we can avoid that. For being in the wrong place at the wrong time, well, again, like you can avoid that for the most part, right? Because even though I didn't trigger that avalanche, like I did decide to go walk up that drainage late in the afternoon. Hopefully the avalanche forecast was talking about rising danger that day and the potential for natural avalanches. And so with just a little bit of change in plans, change in behavior, both of those scenarios can be avoided.
Well, we know that coronavirus has changed skiing and riding. As we know, the ski resorts all closed down on approximately March 15th last year, which encouraged a lot of backcountry use in general. Again, anecdotally, but I think we all feel pretty confident in saying that. So my question is, after ski resorts closed in spring 2020 due to coronavirus concerns, what happened in the Colorado backcountry?
Well, we saw a lot of people going into the backcountry to recreate. We saw parking lots overloaded. We saw people spilling out onto the highways to park, people mostly going towards sort of the easy access points, and then other people getting pushed away from the easy access points kind of deeper into the backcountry or into new areas that they weren't familiar with. And, again, trying to really put your finger on the trend can be difficult sometimes, but I think it's pretty safe to say that we saw an increase in avalanche involvements. About a third of the avalanche involvements that year happened after March 13th. So we did see a lot of involvements. We saw a few pretty serious injuries, and we saw 2 people that unfortunately lost their lives in avalanches during that time period.
Well, thank you for that. That is unfortunate, and something to be thinking about as we go into this season, because we don't know if the ski resorts could end up shutting down again if things get intense with coronavirus again. With COVID restrictions at ski resorts this season, more people will be backcountry and skiing and riding than ever this year. How do you think that will affect Colorado's backcountry this season?
Well, I think, I do agree that, we're likely to see an increase in backcountry use this year. How big of a change that is, remains to be seen. But, certainly with the ski areas closing last year, we did see a big increase. And so if the ski areas are operating in a markedly different fashion this year, which we don't really know exactly what that's going to look like, I think we could see a marked increase in backcountry use as well. How that plays into avalanche involvements, again, it really depends on how the winter unfolds. But from the most simplistic approach, if you have more people that are traveling in avalanche terrain, we are likely to see more avalanche involvements and potentially more deaths.
So I think there are going to be a lot of new users this year, right? We've already been talking at Snowbrains to retail companies, big and small, including small ski shops in local ski towns, places like Tahoe City, places like Breckenridge. All these people are telling us we're selling out of gear. We sold out last year. We already have tons of pre-orders. So I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of new people this year. We're all guessing that. So if you met someone who is planning on getting into the backcountry skiing or riding this season, what advice would you give that person?
I'd tell them to check the avalanche forecast every day before they go out into the backcountry.
Yes, absolutely. And do you think, might that be the number one tool in your bag of tools for approaching the backcountry in avalanche terrain?
Well, in my role, I deal with a lot of different people that go into avalanche or that are affected by avalanches, I guess I should say. And, our advice really should change a little bit based on who we're talking to. So just sort of going through the experience level, if somebody is going out sledding or going out snowshoeing on a packed trail, I think they should check the avalanche forecast before they go out, really just to see whether it's, red or green. There's days when going out and sledding on, that small hill can be dangerous around here. and there's not too many of them. But if they take a look at the forecast, hopefully it'll clue them into those days that maybe they should try to do something else that day. The same is true for the snowshoer or cross-country skier that's not going into avalanche terrain, but is going to be in and around avalanche terrain and could be affected by that. Then there's the people that the skiers and boarders, snow machiners, that are really trying to spend a lot of time in avalanche terrain. And the advice starts the same for them, but then it moves on and becomes a little bit more nuanced. So if you're spending a lot of time in avalanche terrain, of course you want to check the forecast. Getting the current conditions, knowing what you're up against, really is the most important thing. But you also want to get some training so you know how to use that forecast, because you have to downscale it to your route. Like in Colorado, we're putting out forecasts for zones that are 3,000 square miles or so. The nuance of what it's going to be like on the actual ridge that you're climbing, or the bowl that you're descending, or the peak that you're going up, and the route that you're going down. So taking that forecast and scaling it to your route and making sure you have a good trip plan is incredibly important. And it's going to take some training to learn how to do that. There's online material that's really good. There's some great books out there. And of course, there's no substitute for a course where you spend some time in the field really applying this with people. And then, of course, you need to be prepared if you make a mistake. That's having rescue equipment, making sure that everybody in your group has that equipment, knows how to use it. That's a beacon, probe, and shovel at a minimum. There's other devices out there. Reco device is a great thing. Not necessarily for your friends to find you, but for organized rescue if you're at a ski area or nearby. Airbag packs are great devices. It doesn't just stop at avalanche equipment, having extra food, water, first aid kit, knowing how to use it, just good mountain sense. That's, again, one of the wonderful things about these types of sports is that we have all this public land. We're able to use it. We can basically do what we want. And we also need to take the responsibility to take care of ourselves. And so the last thing I guess I would tell people is to make sure that somebody knows what your plan is, knows where you're going, what you're planning on doing, and when you're going to come back. So if something really does go wrong, search and rescue has a place to start.
Fantastic. I'm just going to sum that up. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was 5 things that are quite important for somebody who is just going to get into the backcountry. We're going to say 1, check the forecast. 2, get some education. 3, plan out your route. Have a good plan for your day. 4, have the appropriate gear. We all hear beacon, probe, shovel. And 5 really relates to 3, right? Tell somebody what your plan was for that day. So I think that's all great. And then you mentioned airbag backpack. The basic concept of the airbag backpack, quickly, if you could tell us that. And then what your feeling is on, should everybody have an avalanche airbag backpack?
People talk about the Brazil nut effect. Sometimes I use the potato chip effect. Basically, like you have a bag of potato chips, you open it up, on the top are the big chips, all the little chips have sunk to the bottom. The same thing happens with the bowl of mixed nuts at the party. You take it and you shake it, and the Brazil nuts come to the top, and all the almonds and smaller nuts go to the bottom. The airbag pack basically makes you a big nut or a big chip. You're in this granular flow of avalanche debris. There's blocks, there's small pieces of snow, everything's moving around, there's things in the air. You become this big object, and hopefully everything else sort of settles in around you. And so you end up on the top at the bottom of the debris flow when everything comes to rest. They're a great rescue device. They're not a guarantee of survival by any means. They get punctured. People still get buried with them on, especially in big avalanches or bad terrain traps. It's no substitute for knowing what the snow conditions are and then picking your lines and your use of the terrain carefully. But just like a beacon, it may save your life. Should everyone have one? Well, it's a great device. They do work. It's not the be all and end all.
Have you seen numbers on how it might increase the percentage of survival, the chance of survival? Bruce Tremper once said, I think he was shooting from the cuff. He said, who's an avalanche expert as well. And Bruce said, hey, I think that you might have a 50% greater chance of surviving an avalanche, just in general. Have you seen any numbers like that?
Yeah, there are some numbers. Pascal Hagley from Simon Fraser University did a nice study on this. I don't remember what the numbers are off the top of my head. I think that they're around 40%. The other thing to remember, though, is that a lot of the problems that people have with them are from them not deploying. And some of that is a mechanical failure, so people not assembling them correctly. But a lot of it is people not being able to deploy them. So, I've seen accidents where somebody goes to pull the trigger, they get caught in an avalanche, they go to pull the trigger, and the strap has rotated back out of their reach, so they can't quite grab it. People just get very stressed out from being in an avalanche and can't quite reach it. There's a lot of different ways that we've seen that go wrong. And I think, practicing, just like with the beacon, practicing so that when you are put in a stressful situation, buddy is under the snow, they can't breathe, you're trying to find them, you're trying to locate them with their rear probe, you're trying to dig them out, all of that. The same goes true for airbags, that when you're caught in an avalanche and you need to deploy that thing, it's got to be second nature. You have to have the muscle memory just to have it happen. And so, what they say is you train like you fight. If you're going to rely on an airbag as one of your rescue devices, which is a good thing to do, you need to practice with it, and you need to know how that thing's going to behave, and you need to check it every time before you go out to make sure that the settings are such that it will deploy when you need it, whether it's an air canister or battery life. As far as whether everybody should have one, it really depends on what you're doing. They're heavy. There's definitely some disadvantages to having them. So, if you're planning on avoiding avalanche terrain and you're not going to go into avalanche terrain, maybe it's not the best thing to have. Certainly if you're going out to inner tube down the hill and it's a low hazard day, no, maybe you don't need one. But if you're spending a lot of time in avalanche terrain, it's a great rescue device. Who knows? It may just save your life.
Do you use one?
I do. Yes.
You do. Every day.
I don't use one every single day. For the CAIC, we issue them to the staff, and if someone is traveling solo, we require them, even if they're avoiding avalanche terrain, which typically they're doing if they're traveling solo, we require them to carry one.
One thing that is interesting is, and I think it may have affected me when I first got an avalanche backpack. I think my confidence might have been overly inflated, if you will, not to make a pun there. But have you found that? Yeah, you did like that. He's laughing. So have you found that? Have you talked to anybody? It's probably mostly anecdotal at this point, but do you think that people might have overinflated confidence going into avalanche terrain thinking, oh, I have this airbag, I don't have to worry as much?
It's certainly something that's been discussed a lot, and it's not just airbags. I mean, people discuss this with beacons. They've discussed it with all sorts of rescue equipment. I haven't seen, very detailed studies, just sort of, anecdotal explorations. But certainly if you look at safety devices as a whole and sort of the broader literature over that, whether it's airbags in vehicles or seatbelts, other sorts of safety equipment, in general, I think it's pretty well accepted that with those types of devices, people tend to take more risks and downplay the danger that they're facing. So, when you put in seatbelts, people tend to drive faster. You put in airbags in vehicles, you put in all these different sorts of safety devices where the cars beep at you if you're crossing the white line. People tend to drive faster and take more risks.
It does make a lot of sense. I used one for a while, and I thought it was making me slightly more reckless, which is unnecessary for all of us. And I stopped using it. I think I was more timid without it. And now I use one again. I think I'm older now. And so using one again, I hope I'm just being as safe as possible, plus having the airbag backpack. And then when you're working, how many, I think we all imagine you digging 12 pits each day you're working, but is it more, are you using hand pits? How are you gathering your information on a work day when you're out there creating a forecast?
It really depends on the hypothesis, like what sort of avalanche problem we're worried about and what kind of information we're trying to collect to reduce the uncertainty that we have that day. So
let's say it's a higher avalanche risk day.
If it's a higher avalanche risk day, a lot of times we're looking for signs of that instability. So small test slopes, trying to elicit cracks, whumps, maybe a small avalanche. We're really trying to go thump on the snow and see how it reacts. Typically we do more detailed pits when we have buried weak layers that have not been that responsive or less responsive at this point. And we're trying to understand how the characteristics are changing. We tend to do a lot of test pits and very few formal pits. where we're, collecting temperatures and densities and things like that. We're really looking at stratigraphy, looking at the depth of the weak layer, looking at the characteristics of the weak layer, and doing a lot of stability tests. Even in our test pits, we're doing a lot of stability tests, a lot of PSTs,
Right.
a lot of ECPs.
How many people use the Colorado Avalanche Information Center website, let's just say, to acquire avalanche information each year, do you think?
I don't have, website statistics. So we had over 1 million last year.
Unbelievable. Congratulations.
Website.
That makes me happy.
Yeah. I want more, but we're doing the best we can.
How does the Colorado Avalanche Information Center get its funding, and what can we all do to help you guys?
So our funding comes from kind of 4 main groups. About half of our funding comes from the Colorado Department of Transportation, because we partner with them on their highway avalanche safety program. We do all the forecasting for the state and federal highways in Colorado, and we work with CDOT to map those paths and on the mitigation program that they run to reduce the hazard in Colorado. About 45% or something. The other big piece, it comes from severance tax, which is tax on extraction of oil and gas and minerals in Colorado. And we get that because we're part of the Department of Natural Resources. And so that fund base, state tax money, funds the avalanche program. Then we get a little bit of money from the U.S. Forest Service, because they're a big partner of ours in this whole effort, and they do offer some funding for that. And then the rest of the money comes from the Friends of the CAIC, a nonprofit group that exists to support avalanche safety in Colorado. And we get funding directly from them for forecast operations. And then we also partner with them on a lot of education programs. So what people can do if they want to support the program are 2 things. One is send us their observations, and 2 is send donations to the Friends of the CAIC. You can become a member of the group. You can also attend an event. You can buy hats. And
we'll find you at the Colorado Avalanche Information Center's website?
Yes, you can go to colorado.gov/avalanche, and there's links to the Friends and ways to make donations there. There's also a lot of education programs that they provide, like the Colorado Snow and Avalanche Workshop. So if you attend that workshop, you will be supporting the Friends group and also getting a chance for some great education.
And we'll give you guys more of those resources at the end of this podcast, in the conclusion of this podcast. Well, that's all fantastic. But now I'd like to talk about me. So one little thing that you and I did. One little thing you and I did before this was I showed you my avalanche that I had on Mount Superior in Utah in January 2019. And so I was in a small avalanche. I was able to get out of the avalanche, and I was uninjured, but it was in really consequential terrain, and it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me on skis. And we talked a little bit about before, and I'd love to hear more about your analysis of what happened here, big things and small.
Sure. Well, I watched your video, and then I read your posting, which had kind of your description of what happened, and also had the UAC's forecast for the day. And I used to work at what was then the Utah Avalanche Forecast Center in Salt Lake. So I know that group, and I know the Wasatch, and I know Mount Superior, all relatively.
Yeah, you have to.
Yes, it's a wonderful place. So I guess there's a few things that struck me. I mean, one was, I thought from your description of what happened, that the UAC had done a really nice job of capturing the conditions that day. So they're still forecasting for a big area, but it seemed like they had a nice representation of the avalanche danger and also describing what the problems were in terms of the wind drifted snow. So that was nice. It also sounded like you had read the forecast and had an idea of what the danger was. You had been in that area before. You had stayed out of that area for a couple of days, hoping that the new wind load would stabilize and become less of a problem. And then when you went into it, it seemed like you had kind of a plan for what you were going to do, and ended up triggering a relatively small avalanche. That small avalanche in a lot of places could still be a problem, but it was mostly a problem because of the consequential terrain that you were in. And and that's a really big issue for a lot of us. I think spending time on some of these steeper slopes is that in some places, even very small avalanches can be quite deadly. And certainly the video looked pretty scary. It looked
man.
a
So
scary situation. It did seem again like the avalanche was. If you're going to get caught in an avalanche, it wasn't a bad avalanche to get caught in because it wasn't wide propagating. It was just a small kind of wind pillow, what we call a storm slab, soft snow. It was really kind of laid into that terrain feature, a little thicker on the skier's right. It looked a little thinner as you went off to the left. The way that it was triggered, you were in it, and that would be, I guess, maybe the one thing I would think about is, especially in consequential terrain like that, trying to get into it and get a little feel for the snow before you get too committed and having a little bit of an escape route.
Absolutely.
So, because once you start making turns, this is one thing that we see quite a bit. Not that you did this, but I'll just get on my soapbox for a minute. We get reports from people a lot where they say that they performed a ski cut, and then we get a video or we talk to them a little bit more about how they were approaching terrain, and really what they were doing is skiing and not ski cutting.
I did not ski cut.
Yeah, it's a really different thing, and it really requires planning. And typically, you should be able to talk to your partner before and after the ski cut. And if at the end of your ski cut, you're not able to talk to your partner in some way, you're probably skiing and not ski cutting. And so that would be one thing in a situation like that you could do, is to get a feel for the snow in a way that puts you outside of the boundaries of where that avalanche is going to be before you really commit to it. So although it looked like a scary situation, it didn't look to me like a huge miscalculation of what was going to happen. More that you kind of ended up in a part of the slope that you couldn't get out of the slide when it happened. And because of the terrain that you're in, that looked like a pretty scary situation.
Man, was it ever. Well, thank you so much for that analysis. I appreciate that hugely. Not a lot of people get that from a doctor of avalanche science, more or less. And I'd like to do another podcast with you, just an hour just on ski cuts. So we'll talk about that after the podcast. You mentioned at the beginning, or before we started the podcast, you might have had some numbers that were interesting to look at.
In the 1920 season for us, so that would be October 1st of 19, all the way through the rest of the winter season into the spring. We had 85 incidents in Colorado, which is the median for 5 years is 55, so that's up a little bit. We had 96 people caught. 67 is the median. We had 7 what we call full burials or partial burial critical, where the airway is obstructed, which is right about our average. And we had 6 fatalities, and that's right around our average as well. Again, about a third of those incidents happened after the pandemic shut down. So,
well, that's fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think that is really interesting information. And well, I think that's about all I've got here for you. I really hugely appreciate your time today, Ethan. This has been fantastic. I'm excited to go back, listen to this podcast, and take notes on all the things that I've learned here. So I really appreciate your time and your attitude, and it's just been great chatting with you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. And yeah, it was fun to talk to you as well. And I hope people find this information useful. And remember to go to avalanche.org and check the forecast before you head into the backcountry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Please visit the Colorado Avalanche Information Center's website at avalanche.state.co.us. At their website, you can donate, you can submit observations, and you can find the latest avalanche forecasts. You can also find the Colorado Avalanche Information Center on Instagram at Friends of CAIC. They're also on Facebook, Friends of CAIC. Thank you so much for listening to the Snowbrains podcast. If you liked this podcast, please share with your friends and family, and please subscribe. To find out more about Snowbrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Snowbrains.